with myself.
Hello, everyone, and welcome
Hello.
to this week's episode of Haunted Historians. With me this week, I have author and gent extraordinaire Rod Smith, and myself and Declan Doyle, certified as humans, and we're going to go and hopefully entertain yourselves. We are going to basically drain the swamp of substandard history podcasts is our go-to. And to open us up this week, Rodney, what have you got for us?
Right, chap. So I've gone back in time a little bit this time for a famous woman in history, Mary, Queen of Scots, to tell you a little bit about her. And what generated this was a recent trip to Edinburgh, where we did a trip of Edinburgh Castle and learned a lot about the history and about Mary Queen of Scots. She's kind of a character who's always popped up in history in books and novels and movies. And it was only when I visited Edinburgh that I realized how little I actually know about her life and what happened to her and her tragic end as well. So I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes just telling you briefly about what happened to Mary Queen of Scots. So Mary Queen of Scots was born all the way back in 1542, and her father was James V. And James V badly wanted a son. And legend has it that he came back from a war with lots of injuries, and he saw that his wife had borne a daughter rather than a son, and that he almost died on the spot from not only from his injuries but also from disappointment. Mary was appointed the Queen of Scotland at the ripe old age of 6 days. So obviously, you had consorts there who were ruling Scotland while she was only a nipper. But she was engaged then at the age of 6 to the Dauphin of France, who was next in line to the French throne. And she actually ended up marrying him, Francis, at the age of 16. He then died at a very young age. So at the young age of 19, widow Mary Queen of Scots left France to go back to Scotland. And she had her four ladies in waiting with her. And their names are very easy to remember because their names were Mary, 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 and Mary. So you literally had five Marys traveling from Scotland over to France and then from France back to Scotland. So when Mary got back to Scotland, she was 19 and she was a Catholic Queen of Scotland, which didn't go down too well at the time because Scotland was in the middle of the Protestant Reformation at the time. And John Knox was a huge figure in the Scottish Reformation, and he didn't like the fact that you had a Catholic queen telling people what to do. So there was a lot of argy-bargy between Mary and John Knox. And Mary ended up marrying in 1565 at the age of 23 a chap called Darnley. And she had a son with Darnley, who would become the future King James VI of Scotland. Now, Darnley became jealous of Mary's secretary, who was an Italian chap called Rizzio. And Darnley was involved in the murder of Rizzio. One night, Mary was having dinner with Rizzio, who was her secretary, and a group of people. And these group of people broke in and they actually grabbed Rizzio, hid behind Mary. They said, "We're going to kill you." He hid behind the Queen. They grabbed him away. Mary was pregnant at the time, and they stabbed him over 50 times and threw him down a stairwell. And the unfortunate chap died. Darnley was associated with his death. And sometime later, Darnley, who at the time was married to Queen Mary, was found himself dead in his garden, and his house mysteriously blew up for no particular reason. So there were lots of fingers being pointed at, but who's actually taken out Darnley now, and was because of what happened to Rizzio. Mary then had a bit more controversy when she actually married one of the guys who may have been involved in the death of Darnley. So there was uproar at the time. So she married again in 67. So by the time she was 25, she'd been married three times. So this marriage didn't go down very well in Scotland. And there was, if you like, a sort of a rebellion against her. And she was given an ultimatum that she could step down, and her son, who was only a toddler himself, James, would take over the throne. So Mary fled and went down to England to ask for help from Queen Elizabeth. Now, Queen Elizabeth was her cousin. And Elizabeth had a concern about Mary because Mary was next in line on the throne, because Elizabeth didn't have any children of her own. So Mary was the next legitimate heir. And because the king or queen was always regarded as being chosen by God, no one could argue that Mary was next in line. So if anything happened to Elizabeth, Mary would be there to step in, and Elizabeth was afraid that something might happen for Mary to usurp Elizabeth's power. So Mary came running down to Elizabeth saying, "Please help me, they've taken my throne," and she sentenced her to house imprisonment for the next 19 years in England. So poor Mary was imprisoned for the next 19 years or so, and in the hope that she would eventually try and get back her throne, which never happened. She then got involved in a very ill-advised Catholic plot against Queen Elizabeth, where she was convinced to help out these guys who were plotting the downfall of Elizabeth. And she was actually didn't realize that there was a spy in their midst, and they had handwritten evidence from Mary that she was supporting the purge against Elizabeth. Elizabeth found out, the people were arrested. Queen Mary was arrested as well and sentenced to treason. And the penalty for treason at the time was obviously was the death penalty. So, but Elizabeth had to sign the death penalty in order for Mary to be executed, and she was very reluctant because Elizabeth thought, well, hang on a second, this is a queen, so if I signed the death warrant of a queen now, what's to stop somebody else maybe rearing their head in a couple of years and trying to charge me with something and sentence me to death? So she was very reluctant, but eventually she was persuaded to sign the death warrant. And literally, as soon as the warrant was signed, they raced to the prison in case Elizabeth changed her mind. And poor Queen Mary was beheaded at the ripe old age of 45 years of age. Now, the twist in the tale came in 1603 when Queen Elizabeth died without any children or without any heirs. And it was actually Queen Mary's son, who was James VI of Scotland, became King of England. He became King James I. And King James I is probably well known through history as that he was the one who authorized the creation of the King James Bible, which was an attempt at the time to coordinate all of the different writings and religious and Bible writings that were out there to try and get one common translation from the Bible. So ultimately, Mary got her wish to become, one of her offspring became regent of England. It wasn't herself, but from a woman who was thrust into a position of power at a very young age. And because she was a woman and because she was Catholic at the time as well, ended up ultimately losing her head. But her son went on then to reign and rule, and his generation then ruled England for the next 80 to 90 years or so until we had the famous Battle of the Boyne then. And then that family was overthrown by the famous William of Orange. So that, in a nutshell, is Mary, Queen of Scots, and the end. Poor Mary.
Thanks very much, Ross. I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of the history of Mary. You hear the name an awful lot, but I didn't know. I never really realized the background. I always kind of assumed she was in a more powerful position than she ended up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a bit of a tragic old tale.
There you go. And of course, the irony is you actually had two women in hugely powerful positions at the time, one in England, one in Scotland, and which was very unusual for its time, not just in Europe but anywhere in the world, to have two female monarchs like that in such positions. So you can imagine the reaction of everybody else having, because Elizabeth was always looking over her shoulder for years, because people were always trying to overthrow her. So you can, it's an interesting position when we talk now about people in positions of power. Then you actually had two ladies in very, very strong positions of power, and it wasn't easy for them even 600-700 years, so 600 years ago, 400 years ago, 500 years ago. Yeah. So Queen Mary. So next time you hear a story about Queen Mary of Scots, now have a think about her, and it's there's a lot of history in Edinburgh all about her as well, and I think she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Very good. Okay, will I hop in there?
Hop in there, Sean, by all means, belt away.
Okay, I'm going to talk about a similar period and a similar era. It's 1518 in Strasbourg. There is a woman called Frau Trophea. And one morning in July, a really, really hot summer in Strasbourg, Frau Trophä's husband looks out the window and his wife is dancing in the street randomly. So he goes down and he's a bit peeved, and she keeps dancing and she keeps dancing. There's no apparent music, and he's looking at her, he's getting quite annoyed. But she dances for the rest of the day and goes to sleep and doesn't talk, and gets up early the next morning and starts dancing again, all day. And or not an enjoyable dance. It's not a dance of joy. She's kind of in a little bit of pain. And suddenly a crowd started developing after 3 or 4 days of this woman dancing in a cobbled street in Strasbourg. And on the 8th day, that was the July the 14th, 1518, on the 8th day, people start dancing with her. And suddenly there is a group of about 30 dancing in the heat, and it's sweltering, and they're uncomfortable. They're not dancing out of joy, but these 30 people are dancing almost out of obligation. And it becomes a bit of a thing. Because that group of 30 starts to grow and grow and grow, and the city councils start getting involved, and it's become a thing because these people are not enjoying themselves. They're literally sweating blood, their feet are bleeding, but they just don't seem to be able to stop dancing. Some of them are starting to cry in pain from the dance. So that number keeps getting bigger and bigger. The council get involved and say, right, the only way to deal with this has got to a couple of hundred at this stage. Is what we'll do is we will bring them all in. We'll deck out the city hall, the guild halls. We'll make little dance floors in and around the city, and we play some music, let them dance, whatever it is, kind of fearing it's kind of a demonic possession or something. So they get in, they ship in musicians from around the place, and the whole plan backfires with the music and all that, more and more and more, and suddenly it's hundreds of people who are dancing and basically almost against their will, and they start dying. They reckon at the height of it, there was like 15 people a day dying from strokes, heat strokes, heart attacks, completely unable to stop dancing. So the city council kind of went, okay, right, this is not good. This is obviously a curse. We've been cursed from, they have a famous saint there at the time, Saint Vitus. We've been cursed by Saint Vitus because we're immoral people. So they went and banned all music, and they shut down the gambling halls. They shut down the brothels, but still it didn't stop. And it's well into August now, and people are dropping like flies. Eventually, it got into September, and fearing that this was they were cursed by the saints, as hundreds of people, literally hundreds of people, were either dancing or dying. They carted them off in wagons to the shrine of St. Vitus, which was 3 days travel away. And apparently wore red shoes. They put the red shoes on them. They sprinkled the shoes with holy water. They painted crosses on the tops and the soles. They painted crosses on their hands, and they did incense and obviously did a mass. And apparently they were all eventually forgiven by St. Vitus. And the dancing plague ended there in September after 2 months of an absolute crazy scourge, and hundreds of people died from dancing. And it might sound like a fairy story, but it's actual facts. And there's some mad theories as to why this happened. Demonic possession. There was the theory it was a mass epilepsy. Obviously, there's no such thing as mass epilepsy. Food poisoning. There's a thing called ergotism. That it's apparently in grains in rye. There's a psychoactive product in the ergot fungi that can make people go a little bit psycho. But like, some of them were dancing in sequence, and apparently that didn't explain it either. So what they believe now, looking back on it, it was just stress-induced kind of mass hysteria, or psychogenic movement disorder. This involves just loads of people just exhibiting the same crazy behavior, and it spreads like an epidemic, and it's a stress-induced psychosis on a mass level. And the reasons for this have been given as what was the psychological stress on these people that one lady dancing in the street ended up like an epidemic. And there's like there's a cultural contagion rationale. There was seven other dancing plagues reported in the previous couple of centuries. So there was a lot of superstition involved in this. That the previous plagues, which were much smaller, on smaller scale, than this one, but the people were aware of it. There was 4 famines in the previous 15 years for the people in Strasbourg. There was outbreaks of leprosy, smallpox, failed harvests, and even the cost of living had gone through the roof the previous year. And this was the last ever dancing plague reported. After this, kind of the superstition and the belief in St. Vitus's curse kind of faded, and there was never a case again. But all the other previous 7 cases were all along the Rhine, within a few hundred miles along the Rhine. So there you go, stuff that can get into your head. One lady dancing, who believed she had a course, and suddenly everyone hundreds hopped on board, and they believed they cut the course off her, and that's how it ended up.
Well, I'd say that's no. That takes a biscuit now, Sean. That one, jeepers.
It was just a bit. It's a bit mad. It's just mad interest, and that you can go and swept away on a curve, on a whole journey, paranoid journey. You know.
Yeah, I'll ask you to.
Yeah, you're on mute. You're on mute. If you look at the bottom left. There you go.
No.
Sound?
Yeah.
Good?
Perfect.
Okay. Here's the mad thing, right? I heard the St. Vitus dance in the 80s. There was a pop song in the 80s called St. Vitus Dance. You may remember it.
Right.
You Google it later.
Okay.
Would you hear you go? I remember that fucking thing.
Yeah.
But I remember hearing about it. Now, of course, we'd no research tools back then, apart from the World Books, you know, or the Encyclopedia Britannica, and that wasn't covered in that. So it wasn't until I'd always known the song anyway. But many years later, I met an older woman. She would have been nearly 80, and she happened to mention St. Voices Dance. I went, "Oh, that was an old song in the 80s."
Right.
And she went, "Oh no," and she explained the whole thing to me, and I was fucking amazed at the time, you know.
Yeah.
That's why it's good to talk to old people.
Absolutely. Florence and the Machine, in looking this up, Florence and the Machine based an album around the event as well. That Dance Mania, and had a couple of songs on the album dedicated to the event itself.
Right. Decky, we better jump on to you. We've only 8 minutes left, so
go for it, Decky.
No pressure.
Right. This is about a lad called James F. O'Connell. Now, unheard of person, but he has made a huge cultural impact on the entire continent. Now, this is going back to 1850s. He was on a boat. I'll get the name of it now in a second. My notes are all over the gaff. I'll say I had my shit together earlier. Can't find the name of ship. I've written somewhere. But they were touring around the South Pacific in the 1820s. And the boat ran aground and started sinking. So everyone had to bail off. Most of them died. But there were 6 of them left in a life raft. And they were heading towards this island called Pompeii. Now, not like the Italian Pompeii is an N rather than an M, you know, but it's Pompeii. And these people had never seen anyone foreign apart from other islands in the same area, which were all more or less the same types of people, you know. So they weren't used to seeing white people at all. So when these like came around in their little life raft, they just pelted them with arrows, darts, spears, everything. They survived all this because they were fucked because they were lying down in the boat, so everything was going over them. So they were wheeled, they were brought on shore, wheeled. Now, the culture at the time, it still is more or less the same, but the king of the island owns everything. Everything. The people, fucking trees, Anthony washes up. So the minute they were brought on shore, they were his. So they obviously had no way of communicating with each other. So the locals used to communicate and do their rituals and all this through the medium of dance. So they started doing little dance moves for the lads. Now, James O'Connell was looking at them, and he did not. He obviously they'd all tried talking, and that had failed. So they were doing their dance, and all he could think of doing was a bit of Irish dancing. See? So he did a few little jigs, and they went, "Oh, we can now communicate through the medium of dance." Okay? So, of the 6 of them, 2 of them were Irish, 4 of them weren't. They didn't say where they were from in his diaries. They were jettisoned off because essentially the king owned everything, but he had value on everything. And because the 2 Irish lads were able to dance, ergo communicate with the locals, they had a higher rank than the other 4. So they were kind of cast adrift as slaves. But the 2 lads then, as part of the culture, had to be tattooed. Now, that was unheard of in Western culture at this stage. A lot around the East, now, all over the decent parts of the world, it exists, but not over in the West, and especially not in the Americas. So he did go off. Now, it was a torture regime. It was meant to last 8 days, and you were gauged on how little you screamed during the whole process. So if you didn't scream at all, you were top notch. Now, after 8 days of the 2 of them getting tattooed, one lad was just screaming a fair amount because they got tattooed with shark teeth, brambles, anything with a point on it, really. And they got their entire bodies tattooed, head to toe. If you've ever had a tattoo, it can be a little bit sore. But imagine getting the whole body done over an 8-day period. He didn't scream. On part of his tattoos was the king who owned him. It was like barcodes nearly. It was the history of the king, because King owned them, and about how he came to the island, so on and so forth. So his entire story was written out on his body. Because he didn't scream, he was given a wife of one of the king's daughters. So he became very high ranking. Things were going grand. They didn't want to be there, though, the two Irish lads. They just didn't settle, you know. Even though he'd now a wife and a child, the whole crack, he still wanted to get the fuck out of there. So about 10 years later, an American ship came along. Again, running aground a bit, was still able to go, you know. They came around. Locals again all came out, started fucking throwing shit at them. I know there's probably a better way of putting it than that, but they were launching weapons at them. But these boats were bigger. They were able to withstand what they were throwing at them. Now, bear in mind, the locals thought everything within the area was the king, so they went out in their little boats and tried to tear planks off the ships because it was their ship. That failed miserably because the boats are too big. So they sent out the two Irish lads as some sort of meeting with them to see if they could converse with them. You know, they were able to, because these ships are all Americans. So they managed to convince the Americans that could they just hop on the boat with them and fuck off, because they couldn't stand being there, you know. So after a couple of days of this, they escaped with the American boat. Now, they turned up then in Canada. The other Irish lad, I can't remember his name now, it'll be here somewhere in my notes, but he died just when they got to Canada. He picked up some disease on the boat on the way over, but he died. So James O'Connor was left on his own in this wild, expansive country that people were just arriving in. There was no real settlements as such anywhere. And he was covered in fucking tattoos, which nobody had seen before. So he ended up in Barnum Circus. Because Barnum had never seen that looking before. So he basically toured with Barnum for years and years as the tattooed man. Now, there's no photographs of him during Barnum's period because it was predated photographs. A lot of them came after it, but he was the man who introduced the Americans, tattoos to the Americans.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I'd say it's a tiny little thing. It wasn't by choice, and yet it changed the whole culture, you know. And all because he was able to do a little Irish dancing.
Wow.
Imagine it.
Funny how the dancing is so prevalent now tonight, isn't it? That's incredible now. Yeah.
Stars are aligning again.
They are the line up. An interesting one. Now, gosh, tattooing. It's a great little trade to be in now. Tattooing, there's big money in it.
Very good. What was the last one you had? What was the gender, the female something? What was the story you had before?
The gender of the female thing.
Oh no! Wasn't there an item that someone produced in the 60s or something like that in the 70s from one of your previous podcasts? Or
yeah, we'll have to go back. Yes,
I did a bit more specific.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Anyway,
let's look back. Yeah. Very good.
Yeah, if I had a little more of an inkling, I'd go, yeah, but I just can't do that with that, you know. No.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah.
It's a bit late.
Oh, sorry about all that fucking mess now. See, I moved on to a PC, so I could use the microphone and all that shit.